The shuttle's descent through Talveras III's atmosphere was the kind of smooth that made Jason Rivera suspicious. In his experience, planets this pretty usually came with complications like aggressive wildlife, unstable weather, or local customs that could get you killed if you smiled with the wrong number of teeth. But Talveras III remained serenely beautiful all the way down, its bioluminescent forests glowing against the twilight landscape like someone had scattered stars across the ground. Approaching New Haven Colony, the shuttle's AI announced with the cheerful efficiency of systems that didn't have to worry about cultural misunderstandings. Local time is evening cycle, temperature optimal for human physiology, and your host has been notified of arrival. Jason gathered his equipment, 3 cases of recording gear, 2 personal bags, and the kind of nervous energy that came from starting a new documentation project. The Interspecies Cultural Preservation Foundation paid well for detailed accounts of traditional practices among peaceful species, and Talveras III's agricultural traditions were supposedly worth 6 months of documentation and a publication that would enhance his professional reputation considerably. The landing pad was carved from living stone, or possibly grown. Jason's xenobiology knowledge suggested the Talvery had bioengineering capabilities that made distinguishing between construction and cultivation essentially meaningless. Bioluminescent moss traced patterns across the surface, providing gentle light as the shuttle settled with barely a whisper of displaced air. His host was waiting with the patient posture of someone who'd greeted many off-world visitors. Corvath was tall even by Talvery standards, nearly 7 feet, with skin that shifted through shades of deep green marked with darker patterns. Jason's research suggested indicated elder status and community respect. His eyes were large and expressive, adapted for the planet's lower light levels, and his welcoming gesture involved spreading his hands with palms up in what Jason's cultural briefing had labeled openness and friendly intent. Jason Rivera, Corvath said in Terran standard, accented with the musical quality inherent to Talvery vocal structure. Welcome to New Haven and to Talveras III. Your journey was pleasant, I hope. Very smooth, thank you. Jason returned the gesture as best he could, hoping he got the hand position right. I appreciate your willingness to host me for this project. The Foundation speaks highly of your colony's preservation of traditional practices. We are honored to share our ways with those who seek to understand rather than exploit. Corvath lifted one of Jason's equipment cases with ease that reminded Jason that lighter gravity didn't mean Talvery lacked strength. Come, I will show you to your accommodations, and then perhaps you would join us for the evening harvest celebration. It begins in 2 hours and would provide excellent introduction to our community. They walked through the colony on pathways that seemed to have grown naturally from the landscape, past dwellings that curved organically from the ground and trees that had been convinced to provide shelter while remaining living. Other Talvery paused in their activities to observe the newcomer with friendly curiosity, their skin shifting through colors Jason was learning to recognize: welcoming yellows, curious blues, and the occasional flash of excitement orange from younger colonists. Your people are bioluminescent? Jason asked, noting the subtle glow some Talvery emitted. Our skin reflects our emotional state through color and subtle luminescence, Corvath explained. It evolved as communication method in our forests where verbal signals might be obscured by distance or environment. You will learn the basic patterns quickly. They are intuitive even to species without the capability. Jason's accommodations were in a guest dwelling near the colony's center, a single-room structure that had clearly been modified for human needs, furniture at appropriate heights, atmospheric controls set to Earth-standard comfort, and a waste reclamation system that looked blessedly familiar after some of the more exotic facilities Jason had encountered on other worlds. The harvest celebration is our way of thanking the land for abundance and the community for shared effort, Corvath said, as Jason unpacked basic necessities. Attendance is optional for guests, but you would be most welcome. It would also allow you to meet colony members who might serve as excellent sources for your documentation. Jason agreed immediately. First-person cultural immersion was always more valuable than second-hand accounts, and harvest celebrations across multiple species tended to reveal social structures and values more clearly than formal interviews. 2 hours later, bathed and dressed in clothing appropriate for festive observation, Jason followed the soft music and bioluminescent pathways to the colony's central gathering space. The area was magnificent, a natural amphitheater formed by ancient trees whose branches had been coaxed into living architecture, creating sheltered spaces while maintaining connection to the forest canopy. Bioluminescent plants provided soft, shifting light that painted everything in blues and greens and occasional brilliant purples. Long tables had been arranged in spiral pattern, each laden with foods that ranged from familiar vegetation to preparations that looked beautiful but entirely alien. Talveras colonists were settling into seats with the easy comfort of people who knew each other well, their skin colors shifting through the warm tones that Jason's briefing labeled contentment and communal joy. Corvath guided Jason to a seat near the spiral's center, introducing him to neighbors with titles and relationships Jason tried to track, but knew he'd need his recorder's help to remember. There was Marin, who managed the bioluminescent grain cultivation; Tessra, who maintained the water purification systems; Jorvak, whose role as community harmony keeper sounded like therapist or mediator or possibly both. And then there were Kessa and Lyria. They arrived together in a way that made together seem like an inadequate word. They moved in perfect synchronization, their steps matched to the centimeter, their posture mirrored exactly, their skin shifting through identical color patterns of social warmth and professional awareness. They were tall even by Talveras standards, with athletic builds that suggested significant physical training, and their features were so similar that Jason initially thought he was seeing double from the journey's eye strain. "Jason Rivera," Corvath said, his skin flickering with colors that might have been amusement. "May I present Kessa and Lyria, our colony's security coordinators. They ensure our safety from the occasional aggressive wildlife and maintain peace during gatherings. We're the ones who deal with drunk colonists who think climbing the luminous trees is a good idea," Kessa said, her voice carrying dry humor. "And creatures who think our food stores are open buffets," Lyria added, her tone identical to her sister's but somehow distinct in inflection Jason couldn't quite identify. "Twins," Jason said, because stating the obvious seemed safer than making assumptions about alien biology. "Since birth," they replied in perfect unison, then laughed at his expression, a sound that harmonized in a way that suggested they did everything together by long practice or possibly instinct. They settled into seats across from Jason, with movements that remained eerily synchronized even when they weren't apparently trying. Their skin was shifting through colors more complex than others Jason had observed, deep blue threaded with silver patterns that his briefing's color guide didn't quite cover. "You're here to document our agricultural traditions," Kessa said, leaning forward with interest that seemed genuine rather than polite. "For 6 months, yes," Jason confirmed. "The Foundation believes Talveras farming practices offer valuable insights into sustainable interspecies cooperation with local ecosystems." "That's the professional explanation," Lyria observed, her large eyes sharp with intelligence. "What's your personal interest? Why choose agricultural documentation over the dozen other projects Foundation must offer?" Jason appreciated the directness. "Honestly, I grew up in a city where the closest thing to agriculture was rooftop gardens maintained by automation. I wanted to understand how species build relationships with their environments rather than just exploiting them. Your people's reputation suggested you'd figured out something humans are still struggling with." The twins exchanged a glance that seemed to communicate volumes beyond what Jason could interpret, and their skin flickered through colors that might have been approval or interest or possibly just acknowledgement of honest answer. The meal began with communal blessing, Corvath speaking words in Talvery that Jason's translator rendered as thanksgiving for abundance, community, and the continuation of traditions that honored both past and future. Then food was served in the kind of organized chaos that came from hundreds of people who knew each other well enough to anticipate needs and navigate shared spaces without collision. Jason tried dishes that ranged from familiar vegetable preparations to proteins with textures his human palate struggled to classify. Kessa and Lyria proved to be excellent dinner companions, asking questions about his work, his travels, and his impressions of Talveras III with the kind of engaged curiosity that made conversation feel natural rather than interrogative. "How long have you been traveling for the Foundation?" Lyria asked, passing him something that looked like bread but glowed faintly blue. 6 years, across maybe 20 different worlds. Each project lasts anywhere from 3 months to a year depending on complexity. Jason tried the glowing bread, discovered it tasted like honey and nuts, and made mental note to ask about the recipe. "This is my first extended agricultural study, though." "And before that?" Kessa asked. "You have the bearing of someone with formal training beyond cultural documentation." Jason was impressed by her observation. 4 years in the Terran Exploration Corps before I shifted to cultural work. Combat medic and first contact support. Figured out I preferred understanding species to protecting expeditions from them. The twins' skin flashed interest yellow, and they exchanged another of those loaded glances. "Warrior background and healer training," they said in unison. "Unusual combination." "Practical combination for exploration work," Jason corrected. "You expect trouble but hope to help rather than harm when you encounter it." The conversation flowed naturally through topics ranging from comparative security practices. The twins were genuinely interested in human approaches to community protection, to Jason's documentation methodology, to the various disasters that had befallen his previous projects, including the time he'd accidentally insulted an entire planetary council by using the wrong honorific prefix. Somewhere between the main course and what Corvath called the gratitude sharing, where colonists stood to offer thanks for specific community members or events, Kessa asked a question that seemed casual at the time. "Do you have family traveling with you, partner or companions who share your documentation work?" Jason laughed, accustomed to questions about his solitary work style. It was unusual among humans to travel alone for years at a time, and other species often found it strange that he maintained no permanent attachments or home base. "Nope, I'm single," he said cheerfully, reaching for his drink. "Solo traveler, solo documentarian, solo everything. It's easier for the kind of work I do. No need to coordinate schedules or convince partners to spend months on agricultural worlds. Just me and whatever project needs documenting." He was raising his glass to his lips when he noticed the silence. The twins had frozen mid-motion. Kessa's hand halted halfway to her plate and Lyria's suspended near her drinking vessel. Their skin was cycling through colors rapidly. Surprise white, then determination gold, then something that looked almost like joy mixed with fierce resolve in shades Jason had no reference for. They looked at each other with the kind of intense eye contact that suggested entire conversations happening through whatever bond twins shared. Then, moving in perfect synchronization, they turned to Jason and simultaneously reached across the table to take his hands, Kessa capturing his left, Lyria his right, their grips gentle but unmistakably claiming. "Then we claim you," they said in perfect, harmonized unison, their voices resonating in a way that made nearby conversations stop. "By the laws of our people and the blessing of the twin bond, we declare our intent to court Jason Rivera of Earth." They raised his captured hands, displaying them to the gathering, May our families witness and approve." The entire celebration hall went quiet. Every Talvery present turned to look at their table with expressions ranging from surprised approval to knowing smiles, and several elders, including Corvath, were making sounds that Jason's translator unhelpfully rendered as affirmation of proper courtship declaration. Jason's brain performed several calculations simultaneously, all arriving at the conclusion that he'd said something catastrophically wrong and was currently experiencing the cultural misunderstanding equivalent of stepping on a landmine. What? He managed, his hands still imprisoned by the twins whose skin was now glowing with colors his briefing definitely hadn't covered. "You declared yourself unclaimed," Kessa said, her expression mixing fierce joy with something that looked like relief. "In response to direct question about partnership status," Lyria added, her grip on his hand remaining gentle but unshakable. "This is recognized invitation for courtship consideration," they concluded together, and their synchronized delivery was starting to be less charming and more alarming given the context. Corvath appeared at Jason's elbow with the expression of someone about to deliver news that ranged from interesting to catastrophic, depending on perspective. His skin was shifting through diplomatic neutrality colors, which Jason found less than reassuring. "It appears," the elder said carefully, "that you have accidentally triggered one of our more binding cultural traditions." Jason looked between the twins, still holding his hands, still glowing with colors that suggested they had no intention of releasing either his hands or their claim, and Corvath, whose expression suggested this situation was going to require significant explanation. "I think," Jason said slowly, "I need someone to explain exactly what I just did, because from my perspective, I answered a question about traveling companions. From your perspective, I apparently just—" He gestured helplessly with the hands still captured by Kessa and Lyria. "What exactly did I do?" "You declared yourself available for bonding," Corvath said, with the patience of someone who'd explained cultural nuances to confused aliens before. "And you did so in the presence of two warriors of the twin bond who found you worthy of their interest." "The twin bond?" Jason asked, though part of his brain was already making concerning connections. Kessa and Lyria's skin flashed with colors that looked like pride mixed with fierce determination. They spoke in unison again, and Jason was beginning to understand that their synchronized speech wasn't performance, but natural result of whatever connection twins shared in Talvery culture. "We are born with telepathic link," they explained together. "Our thoughts and emotions are shared, our experiences unified. Where one goes, the other follows. What one feels, the other knows." They paused, and Kessa continued alone. "When twin sisters show interest in the same partner, our customs dictate we must pursue courtship together," Lyria finished. "To compete would risk breaking our sacred bond," they concluded in unison. "So we claim together, court together, and bond together. It is our way, honored for generations." Jason stared at them, at Corvath, at the assembled Talvery who were watching with expressions of warm approval and interest, and processed that his casual comment about being single had somehow triggered formal courtship claim from telepathically bonded twin warriors, who were now culturally obligated to pursue him together. "This is a joke," he said hopefully. "Cultural prank on the ignorant human who didn't read his briefing thoroughly enough." "This is no joke," Corvath said gently. "The twins have made proper claim according to our traditions. You declared yourself unclaimed in response to their inquiry, which in our culture signals openness to bonding consideration. They responded with formal courtship declaration, witnessed by the community. These are binding acts with significant cultural weight." Jason tried to extract his hands from the twins' grip. They held on, not painfully, but with the kind of determination that suggested escaping would require more force than diplomatic situations allowed. "I didn't mean it as a declaration," Jason protested. "I was just explaining my work situation. Humans say I'm single casually all the time without meaning we're inviting courtship proposals." We understand this now, Lyria said, her expression sympathetic but unchanged in resolve. But the words were spoken, the claim was made, and the community has witnessed, Kessa added, her grip on his hand remaining steady. What happens if I just refuse? Jason asked. Say this was a misunderstanding and walk away. The twins' skin flickered through colors that looked distinctly hurt, and Korvath's expression grew more serious. That would dishonor both you and them. It would suggest either that you spoke carelessly about important matters, marking you as untrustworthy in future interactions, or that they misread obvious signals, which would question their judgment and standing in the community. Neither option is acceptable, the twins said together, their voices carrying weight that suggested this wasn't just cultural preference but deeply held value. Jason sat back in his chair, which was difficult with his hands still captured, and tried to process the situation with the kind of calm he developed through years of navigating cultural minefields. He was on Talveras III for 6 months of agricultural documentation. He'd made a casual comment that, through cultural differences, had been interpreted as invitation for courtship. Two telepathically bonded twin warriors had responded with formal claim that was apparently witnessed and binding according to local traditions. And refusing now would create social complications that could jeopardize his entire project and the colony's willingness to cooperate. Is there, he asked carefully, any traditional way to resolve this that doesn't involve either committing to courtship? I didn't mean to invite or dishonoring everyone involved. Korvath's skin shifted through considering colors, and he exchanged glances with several other elders who drifted closer during the conversation. They conferred briefly in Talvery, and Jason's translator caught fragments about ancient protocols and proving periods and cultural accommodation for ignorant but well-meaning aliens. There is one option, Korvath said finally. The proving period, when courtship claims arise from potential misunderstanding rather than clear intent. Our traditions allow for 30 days where the interested parties demonstrate compatibility through shared activities and cultural exchange. At the end of the period, the one being courted can either accept the bond formally or decline honorably, with the understanding that both parties gave genuine effort to understanding each other. 30 days, Jason repeated, during which Kessa and Lyria would attempt to court me, while I learn enough about your culture to make an informed decision. Precisely, Korvath confirmed. It preserves everyone's honor. You didn't speak carelessly. You were simply unfamiliar with customs and are now taking appropriate time to learn them. The twins didn't misread signals. They responded properly to what appeared to be invitation and are now demonstrating their worthiness. And the community witnesses both parties acting with integrity. Jason looked at the twins, who were watching him with expressions that mixed hope with fierce determination. Their skin was cycling through colors that his limited knowledge suggested indicated nervous anticipation and genuine desire for him to agree. And if after 30 days I still want to decline, he asked, then you may do so honorably, Lyria said. We will have demonstrated our worth and our sincere interest. You will have learned our culture and made informed choice rather than ignorant rejection. No dishonor attaches to either party, though we will endeavor to ensure you do not wish to decline. Kessa added with a smile that was charming and slightly terrifying in its confident determination. Jason performed rapid calculations weighing diplomatic necessity, cultural respect, professional obligations, and the fact that refusing seemed both rude and potentially harmful to people who were looking at him with such hopeful intensity. All right, he said, and felt the twins' grips on his hands tighten with what seemed like relief and joy. 30 days, the proving period. You demonstrate Talvery courtship traditions, I learn your culture, and at the end, we all make informed decisions about whether this accidental situation becomes an actual relationship. The twins' skin flashed brilliant gold, and they released his hands only to stand and offer formal bows that their synchronized movements made look like choreographed performance. "We accept the proving period," they said in unison. "We will demonstrate our worthiness as partners and our understanding of the sacred responsibility we claim. May the next 30 days bring clarity and connection." The gathered Talvery applauded with gentle percussion sounds Jason was learning indicated approval, and Corvath's skin shifted through colors that definitely suggested amusement at the ignorant human who'd accidentally invoked courtship protocols. As the celebration resumed and the twins settled back into their seats, still watching Jason with expressions of fierce devotion that suggested they took this claiming very seriously, Jason reflected that his casual joke about being single had just committed him to 30 days of being courted by telepathically bonded twin alien warriors. His Foundation supervisor was either going to be fascinated by the unprecedented cultural immersion opportunity or furious about professional boundaries being catastrophically violated. Jason suspected it would depend entirely on whether he survived the next 30 days without causing additional diplomatic incidents. The twins were already discussing courtship plans in low voices, their skin flickering through excited colors, and occasionally glancing at Jason, with expressions that mixed calculation with what might have been genuine affection. Jason took a long drink of something that tasted like fruit and hope. He wasn't making the biggest mistake of his professional life. Though looking at Kessa and Lyria's synchronized smiles and their obvious delight at his agreement to the proving period, he had to admit that if he was going to accidentally, Jason woke the next morning in his guest dwelling to the soft chime of an incoming message and the lingering disorientation of someone who'd spent the previous evening being formally claimed by twin alien warriors. For approximately 3 seconds, he entertained the hope that it had been a vivid dream brought on by exotic food and cultural overload. Then he checked his messages and found a detailed schedule from Kessa and Lyria titled Courtship Activities, Day 1 of Proving Period, with timestamps, locations, and what appeared to be contingency plans marked if human requires additional rest periods. The dream theory collapsed under the weight of organized enthusiasm. The first activity was listed as Shared Morning Meal Introduction to Twin Bond Domestic Practices, scheduled for 1 hour from now at the twins' residence. Jason had 30 minutes to shower, dress, and mentally prepare for whatever twin bond domestic practices involved. He arrived at the designated dwelling to find it was larger than his guest quarters, but still modest by the standards of some Talvery homes he'd observed. What made it distinctive was the perfect symmetry: 2 entrances side by side, windows arranged in mirrored patterns, and when Kessa opened the door, with Lyria visible exactly 3 steps behind in what appeared to be unconscious coordination, he saw the interior continued the theme. "Welcome," they said in unison, their skin shifting through welcoming yellows. "Please enter our home and witness how twin bond shapes our living space." The dwelling was designed for synchronized living in ways that would seem redundant for most species, but clearly made sense for telepathically bonded twins. 2 of everything arranged in perfect symmetry, sleeping areas on opposite walls that mirrored each other exactly, workspaces that faced each other with identical equipment. Even the kitchen had dual preparation areas where Kessa and Lyria were currently cooking in coordinated movements that looked like choreographed dance. "We don't always move in synchronization," Lyria explained, noticing Jason's fascination with their coordinated chopping of vegetables. "But we often do unconsciously when relaxed or focused on shared tasks. Our telepathic bond means we know each other's intentions before conscious thought," Kessa added, her knife work perfectly timed with her sister's. "When cooking together, I don't need to ask if she's ready for the next ingredient. I know because she knows, and we adjust automatically." They gestured for Jason to sit at a table that, unlike everything else, was singular rather than duplicated, apparently designed for entertaining guests who didn't come in synchronized pairs. The meal they served was impressive. Various Talvery dishes arranged with artistic precision, each explained in detail as they took seats on either side of Jason. "This is morning grain, prepared traditionally with forest herbs," Kessa said, indicating a bowl that smelled like earth and growing things. "And this is protein from our aquaculture systems, seasoned for human digestive compatibility," Lyria added, gesturing to something that looked like fish and tasted subtly of citrus. They ate together, and Jason discovered the twins had done research on human dietary needs. Every dish was not only safe for him, but actually appealing, suggesting they'd consulted databases or possibly other humans about preferences and tolerances. "So," Jason said, navigating something that tasted like sweet bread, "the proving period involves you demonstrating Talvery courtship traditions. What exactly does that entail?" The twins exchanged one of their loaded glances, entire conversations clearly happening through their telepathic bond before Kessa spoke. "Talvery courtship emphasizes compatibility demonstration through shared experience. We will invite you to participate in our daily activities, teach you our customs, and reveal ourselves as individuals and as bonded unit. You'll learn our professional duties as security coordinators," Lyria continued. "Our personal interests, our hopes for potential partnership, and the unique nature of twin bond relationships. And we'll learn about you," they concluded together. "Your work, your culture, what you seek in partnerships if you seek them at all." Jason appreciated the structure. It was essentially accelerated relationship building with the explicit goal of determining compatibility, just framed through Talvery cultural practices rather than human dating conventions. "I should clarify something," he said, setting down his eating utensil. "I've never seriously considered a relationship with multiple partners, not because I'm opposed philosophically, but because it's not common in human culture and hasn't been an option that presented itself. I'm going into this with almost no framework for how it would actually work." The twins' skin flickered through understanding colors, and Lyria leaned forward. "This is why the proving period exists. You'll learn through experience rather than theoretical consideration. Twin bond partnerships are different from typical polyamorous relationships humans might practice." "How so?" Jason asked, genuinely curious. "We're not two separate individuals who happen to share a partner," Kessa explained. "We're a unified consciousness in two bodies. Our telepathic bond means we share thoughts, emotions, and experiences in real time. When you spend time with one of us, the other experiences it through our connection," Lyria added. "When you speak to Kessa, I hear not just the words but her emotional response and her understanding of your meaning. We're not dividing attention, we're receiving it collectively." Jason tried to wrap his head around the concept. "So from your perspective, a relationship with me wouldn't be two separate bonds but one collective relationship with a unified entity that happens to have two bodies." "Exactly," they said together, their skin flashing approval colors at his understanding. "This is why twin bond courtship requires both sisters to pursue together. Attempting to form separate relationships would work against our nature and risk damaging our telepathic connection." The conversation continued through the meal, touching on topics from the practical, how they coordinated their security work, to the personal, what they hoped to find in a potential partner beyond cultural obligation. "We've had courtship interest before," Kessa admitted. "Other Talvery who found our bond fascinating or wanted to experience partnership with twins. But those relationships ended when the partners realized they couldn't truly understand our unified consciousness," Lyria added, her expression carrying old hurt. "They treated us as two separate people who happened to be together. Rather than understanding, we're genuinely one mind with dual physical presence. We're hoping," they said in unison, "that an outsider from a different species might approach our bond without preconceptions that blind others to its true nature." Jason felt the weight of their hope, and the vulnerability beneath their confident warrior exteriors. They weren't just fulfilling cultural obligation or pursuing casual interest. They were genuinely searching for someone who could understand and appreciate their unique nature. After the meal, they invited him to observe their morning duties. Jason followed them through the colony as they conducted security checks, inspecting perimeter markers that detected approaching wildlife, reviewing overnight sensor logs, and greeting colonists with the kind of easy familiarity that spoke to their integration into community life. What struck Jason was how they worked together. When Kessa spoke to a colonist about concerning sounds near the forest edge, Lyria was already pulling up sensor data to correlate with the report. When Lyria investigated a disturbed section of perimeter, Kessa was positioning herself to cover potential approach angles without verbal coordination. They moved like a single entity with perfect spatial awareness, their telepathic bond making communication unnecessary. "How far does your connection extend?" Jason asked during a break in their patrol. "Can you sense each other's thoughts and feelings at any distance?" "Distance weakens clarity but doesn't break the bond," Lyria explained. "If Kessa is across the colony, I feel her emotions and general state, but don't share her thoughts as clearly as when we're in proximity." "We've never tested extreme distances," Kessa added. "We've never been more than a few kilometers apart since birth. The thought of separation causes psychological distress for both of us. Which is why partnership must include both of us," they concluded together. "We cannot function independently for extended periods without significant emotional cost." Jason processed this, understanding clicking into place. Their bond wasn't just cultural tradition or convenient telepathy, it was fundamental to their psychological well-being. Attempting to form a relationship with only one twin wouldn't just be incomplete, it would be actively harmful to both of them. The afternoon brought combat training, which Jason had agreed to with the naive confidence of someone who'd forgotten that Talveras evolved on a lighter gravity world, and still developed warrior traditions that suggested their ancestors faced significant threats. The training ground was another symmetrical space, matching equipment on both sides, dual practice areas that mirrored each other exactly. Kessa and Lyria demonstrated Talveras combat techniques, moving through forms that were beautiful and clearly lethal in equal measure. Talveras martial arts emphasize efficiency and adaptability, Kessa explained, her movements flowing from defensive posture to strike so quickly Jason almost missed the transition. "We evolved as cooperative hunters, which shaped our fighting style to emphasize teamwork over individual prowess. For twins, this becomes more pronounced," Lyria added, moving to attack Kessa in what was clearly demonstration rather than actual combat. "Our telepathic bond allows perfect coordination. We know each other's intentions before execution, which means we can react to threats our partner perceives even before we see them directly." They demonstrated, moving through a sparring sequence that looked like dance choreography. Kessa would react to threats approaching from behind because Lyria saw them and shared the knowledge through their bond, while Lyria would shift position to cover angles Kessa's awareness provided. Their coordination was so perfect that Jason could barely track the individual decisions being made. Then they invited him to try. "We'll adapt to human limitations," they assured him with gentle encouragement. "This is about teaching you our style, not testing your warrior capabilities." What followed was humbling and educational in equal measure. Jason had military combat training, but it was designed for human physiology and Earth gravity. Talveras techniques required different weight distribution, different timing, and coordination with a partner who could read your intentions telepathically, something Jason definitely couldn't provide. But Kessa and Lyria were patient teachers, breaking techniques into components he could manage and offering encouragement when he attempted movements that his human frame wasn't designed for. When he successfully executed a defensive sequence after the 7th attempt, their skin flashed proud gold, and they celebrated with synchronized enthusiasm that was genuinely touching. You learn quickly, Kessa observed as they concluded the session. And you don't let physical limitations prevent you from attempting techniques outside your natural capability, Lyria added. This shows adaptability and determination we value. I'm a mediocre student compared to any Talvery child, Jason said honestly, accepting water they'd provided. But you're an excellent student for a human with no prior experience in Talvery techniques, they corrected in unison. We don't expect you to match our capabilities. We expect you to make genuine effort to understand our ways. You've exceeded expectations. The evening brought what they called discourse and connection time, essentially sitting together in their dwelling, discussing topics from philosophy to personal experiences, while bioluminescent plants cast gentle light through windows. Jason learned that Kessa was slightly more outgoing, quicker to make jokes and engage strangers, while Lyria was more contemplative, preferring to observe before contributing but offering deeper insights when she did speak. But even these differences were subtle. They were fundamentally one entity expressing itself through slight variations in personality rather than truly separate individuals. What do you hope to gain from this proving period? Jason asked as twilight deepened into night. Beyond fulfilling cultural obligation, what are you actually looking for in a potential partner? The twins were quiet for a moment, their skin shifting through thoughtful colors as they considered their response, or possibly consulted with each other through their bond about how to articulate their answer. Understanding, Kessa said finally, someone who sees our bond as feature rather than complication. Patience, Lyria added. Someone willing to learn our unique nature rather than expecting us to conform to typical relationship structures. And connection, they concluded together. Someone we can share our lives with who appreciates what we offer collectively rather than being frustrated by our inability to separate. We're lonely, Kessa admitted, her skin flickering vulnerable colors. We have each other always, but that's also a form of isolation. We're complete within our bond, which means others often feel unnecessary to us or frustrated that they can't form the kind of individual connection they're accustomed to. We're hoping, Lyria said softly, that you might understand our unity rather than resent it, that you could form partnership with us as we actually are, not as two separate people you wish we could become. Jason felt the weight of their vulnerability, the courage it took to admit loneliness when they had each other constantly. They were seeking something his human cultural conditioning hadn't prepared him to understand, a relationship that wasn't about completing them or filling a void, but about sharing the fullness they already possessed with someone who could appreciate it. I can't promise I'll be what you're looking for, Jason said honestly. But I can promise to approach this proving period with genuine openness, to try to understand your bond rather than expecting you to explain it in frameworks that don't apply, and to make decision at the end based on actual compatibility rather than cultural fear of unconventional relationships. The twins' skin flashed grateful gold, and they reached out simultaneously to take his hands, the same claiming gesture from the previous evening, but gentler now, more invitation than declaration. That's all we ask, they said in unison, genuine effort to understand us as we are. Jason left their dwelling as night fully settled over Talveras III, his head full of new information, and his heart doing complicated things he wasn't ready to analyze. The twins had walked him to his quarters, their synchronized movements now familiar rather than disconcerting, and their parting included invitation to join them for morning patrol the next day. Back in his guest quarters, Jason reviewed his recordings from the day and began drafting field notes that would become part of his cultural documentation. The Foundation wanted detailed accounts of Talvery traditions, and he was certainly getting unprecedented access to courtship practices rarely observed by outsiders. But beneath the professional documentation, Jason admitted to himself that the twins were compelling in ways that had nothing to do with cultural obligation or completing his project. They were intelligent, dedicated to their community, skilled warriors who could also be surprisingly gentle, and genuinely interested in understanding him as much as they wanted him to understand them. And their bond, the way they moved in perfect coordination, shared thoughts and emotions, experienced the world as unified consciousness, was fascinating in ways Jason found himself wanting to explore beyond academic interest. He had 29 more days of the proving period to determine if fascinating translated to actual compatibility, and if he was capable of forming the kind of relationship they needed. Looking at the schedule they'd sent for the next day, including something called Twin Bond Meditation Practices, an introduction to Talveras cultural philosophy, Jason suspected the next 4 weeks would be the most intensive cultural immersion he'd ever experienced, and possibly the most complicated relationship evaluation of his life. Outside his window, the bioluminescent forests glowed against the night, and somewhere in their symmetrical dwelling, Kessa and Lyria were probably discussing the day through their telepathic bond, evaluating whether the human who'd accidentally triggered their courtship claim showed promise of becoming actual partner. Jason hoped he was measuring up to their expectations while simultaneously terrified of what it would mean if he did. The galaxy was full of strange and wonderful possibilities he'd learned through years of traveling. Some of the strangest and most wonderful, apparently, began with casual jokes about being single and ended with being courted by telepathically bonded twin warriors who refused to let him escape. Jason set his alarm for early morning, reviewed the twins' schedule one more time, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that he was genuinely looking forward to tomorrow's activities. Day 1 of the proving period. Survived and possibly slightly charmed by the experience. 29 days remaining to determine if being claimed by Kessa and Lyria was the best or worst accidental decision of his life. The proving period's second week brought complications Jason hadn't anticipated. The twins' courtship efforts intensified. They invited him to participate in community duties, taught him Talveras meditation practices designed to promote mental clarity, and shared personal histories that revealed the depth of their bond and the challenges of being perceived as singular unit when they were two distinct personalities unified by telepathy. Jason found himself genuinely enjoying their company beyond cultural obligation. Kessa's quick humor balanced Lyria's contemplative nature in ways that made conversations engaging, and their synchronized movements had gone from uncanny to mesmerizing. He caught himself looking forward to their scheduled activities and disappointed when duties separated them for even short periods. But complications arose from multiple sources. First, word of the courtship spread beyond the colony. Apparently, twin warriors claiming an off-world partner was newsworthy enough that several interspecies cultural networks picked up the story. Jason's Foundation supervisor sent increasingly urgent messages asking if he needed intervention, or if he was comfortable documenting the process firsthand. Second, some colony members expressed concern that Jason couldn't truly understand or honor the sacred nature of twin bonds, suggesting that an outsider would inevitably fail to appreciate what Kessa and Lyria offered. The twins defended him publicly, their skin flashing protective colors, but Jason felt the pressure of expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. Third, and most significantly, Jason realized he was developing genuine feelings for both Kessa and Lyria, not as separate individuals, but as the unified entity they kept explaining they were. Their combined attention was overwhelming in the best possible way. Their shared consciousness meant he never had to repeat himself or clarify intentions, and their fierce devotion to making him comfortable while refusing to lower their standards was exactly the kind of partnership dynamic he'd never known he wanted. During a private conversation in their dwelling, the twins addressed his obvious internal conflict with characteristic directness. "You're afraid," they observed, their skin shifting through analytical colors as they studied his expression. Jason didn't bother denying it. "I'm afraid I won't be enough. That loving, or learning to love, two people simultaneously means I'll fail to give either of you what you deserve." The twins exchanged their usual loaded glance, then Kessa spoke alone. "You're thinking about this wrong. You're not forming two separate relationships. You're forming one relationship with a unified consciousness that happens to have dual physical presence," Lyria finished. They moved closer, sitting on either side of him on their dwelling's symmetrical seating. "When you spend time with Kessa, I experience it through our bond," Lyria explained. "Her emotions become my emotions. Her physical sensations echo in my awareness. When you make her laugh, I feel the joy. When you touch her hand, I sense the contact. We're not competing for your attention or affection," Kessa added. "We're receiving it collectively and experiencing it together. Your focus on one is focus on both because we're never truly separate in consciousness, even when physically apart." Jason processed this, a concept finally clicking that had been eluding him since the claiming. "So from your perspective, there's no division of my time or attention. When I'm with either of you, I'm effectively with both of you." "Exactly," they said in unison. "I'm willing to try," he said, and meant it completely. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes or occasionally struggle with concepts that seem natural to you. But I'm genuinely interested in learning what partnership with you actually means, beyond cultural tradition or completing my proving period obligation." The twins' skin flashed brilliant gold, and they moved simultaneously to embrace him, carefully, aware of human fragility, but unable to contain their joy at his genuine commitment. The remaining weeks of the proving period became less about cultural evaluation and more about building actual relationship. Jason learned the rhythms of their shared life, participated in community duties alongside them, and discovered that being with Kessa and Lyria felt right in ways he couldn't fully articulate but stopped trying to rationalize. The formal ceremony at the end of the proving period was attended by the entire colony. Jason stood before the gathered Talvery and declared his acceptance of Kessa and Lyria's bond, committing to partnership that honored their unified nature while bringing his own human perspective to their relationship. The twins' skin flashed colors of pure joy as they formally accepted him as partner, and the colony celebrated what was apparently the first successful off-world bonding with twin warriors in recent history. 6 months after the accidental claiming, Jason sat in the dwelling he now shared with Kessa and Lyria, reviewing his cultural documentation while the twins prepared their evening meal with the synchronized precision he'd learned to appreciate rather than find unsettling. His project had evolved significantly. What began as agricultural documentation had expanded to include detailed first-hand accounts of Talvery bonding traditions, twin bond psychology, and the challenges and rewards of interspecies partnerships built on cultural frameworks completely foreign to human conditioning. The foundation had been surprisingly supportive once they understood the depth of genuine cultural immersion Jason was experiencing. His supervisor had called it unprecedented access to Talvery courtship practices, and suggested his documentation would become essential reading for anyone studying interspecies relationship dynamics. But beyond the professional value, Jason had discovered something far more important. He was genuinely happy. Living with Kessa and Lyria had challenges. Their telepathic bond meant they sometimes forgot to include him in conversations happening partially through their mental connection. Their synchronized nature occasionally made him feel like the outsider in his own relationship, and adjusting to partnership structure that most humans would find unconventional required constant conscious effort. But the rewards far outweighed the complications. Their unified consciousness meant communication was rarely complicated. When he explained something to one twin, the other understood through their bond. Their fierce devotion meant he never questioned whether they valued him or the relationship. And their combined attention, once he'd accepted that it wasn't divided but genuinely collective, was the most fulfilling partnership dynamic he'd ever experienced. They'd learned about human culture through him, adapting their unified approach to accommodate his occasional need for individual attention, while helping him understand that even in those moments, he was never truly alone with one twin. The other was always present through their bond, experiencing everything through their connection. "You're thinking loudly," Kessa observed, glancing over from her cooking. "Your contemplative face is very obvious." "I can feel your emotional state through Kessa's awareness," Lyria added, her hands moving in perfect synchronization with her sister's chopping. "You're content but slightly melancholy. What troubles you?" Jason smiled at their combined perception, something that had seemed invasive at first, but now felt like being genuinely known in ways previous partners had never achieved. "Not troubled," he said honestly. "Just reflecting on how much has changed since I made a stupid joke about being single and accidentally triggered the most significant relationship of my life." The twins stopped their cooking in perfect unison, turned to face him with matching expressions of fierce affection, and spoke together. "It was the best mistake either of us could have made." They moved to sit on either side of him, their presence warm and comforting in the way he'd learned to associate with genuine home rather than temporary accommodation. "We were lonely before you," Kessa admitted, her skin shifting through vulnerable colors. "Complete within our bond but isolated by it. Others couldn't understand our unity or resented that they couldn't form the kind of individual connection they expected. You approached our bond with curiosity rather than resentment," Lyria continued. "You learned to see us as we actually are, one consciousness with dual presence, rather than wishing we could be two separate individuals. And you gave us what we were searching for without knowing we were searching," they concluded in unison. "Partnership that honors our nature rather than trying to change it." Jason wrapped his arms around both of them, still amazed that this was his life now. Living on an alien world with telepathically bonded twin warriors who'd claimed him because of a cultural misunderstanding and kept him because of genuine compatibility neither side had expected. "I should send a thank you message to whoever designed the algorithm that assigned me to Talveras III," he said. "Agricultural documentation was supposed to be my least complicated project. Instead, it became the most personally transformative." "The galaxy has strange ways of providing what we need," Kessa observed. "Often through catastrophic cultural misunderstandings that terrify us before becoming the foundation of joy," Lyria added. They sat together in comfortable silence, the bioluminescent plants in their dwelling casting gentle light that reminded Jason he was home in ways Earth had never managed to be. His casual joke about being single had led to being claimed by twin alien warriors who refused to let him go. And now, months into their bond, Jason found he had no desire whatsoever to escape what he'd accidentally started. The twins had taught him that love didn't always follow the scripts his culture provided, that the best partnerships were sometimes the ones you never planned for, and that being claimed by two people who shared consciousness was infinitely better than the solitary existence he'd convinced himself he preferred. Somewhere in the colony, other Talveri were living their unified lives. Across the galaxy, humans were following conventional relationship paths that made sense within their cultural conditioning. But here, in a symmetrical dwelling on a world of bioluminescent forests, Jason Rivera had found something rare and beautiful. A relationship that honored who his partners actually were, that challenged his assumptions about what love could look like. And that began with a stupid joke and became the most genuine connection he'd ever known. Kessa and Lyria's skin flashed contented colors as they settled against him, their synchronized breathing and shared consciousness creating a peace that needed no words. And Jason, who traveled the galaxy documenting other species' traditions, finally understood that sometimes the most valuable discoveries were the ones you made about yourself through connections you never expected to form. His documentation project would continue. His relationship with the twins would deepen, and the galaxy would keep turning, full of strange and wonderful possibilities that began with cultural misunderstandings and ended with connections that transcended everything any single culture thought relationship should be. It was a good life, Jason decided. Strange, yes. Unconventional, absolutely. But genuinely, completely good.